RMS Titanic, a name synonymous to tragedy, it was the wreck of the century, and although it was not the deadliest shipwreck of all time, there is just something about it, from its intriguing passengers to heartbreaking accounts, all the way to incredible survivor stories that people find alluring and still fascinates to this day over 100 years later. Come aboard and explore some of the facts you may not know about the Titanic. Among the Titanic's passengers were not only humans, but the ship carried a number of live animals, including a cow, chickens, and dogs. Captain Edward Smith was to helm the maiden voyage. Smith was one of the most experienced sea captains of his time, that apparently he even had a cult following. Well-off passengers would refuse to go on voyages unless he was the one commanding the ship, earning him the nickname the Millionaire's Captain. This might be the very reason that important people were traveling on the Titanic that fateful day, although it was open to all walks of life. In fact, the cost of a ticket for the Titanic ranged from a mere $36.50 for a third-class passenger to a whopping $4,350 for a luxury suite in the first class. Adjusted for inflation, that first-class ticket would be worth around $105,000 today. Can you imagine? Ultimately, no amount of money they had would make a difference once their fate was sealed. It is well known that Captain Edward Smith stayed with the Titanic, and his last words said was, "Well, boys, do your best for the women and children, and look out for yourselves," taking the phrase "a captain goes down with his ship" to heart. One of the passengers, Molly Brown, became a sensation after the Titanic, and for a reason. While she was already in the papers for striking it rich with her husband years into their marriage, it was her actions when people were in distress that really mattered. Molly helped in the ship's evacuation, taking an oar herself in her lifeboat and urging the lifeboat crew to go back and save more passengers in the water. What a hero. But she is not the only one. There are a handful of heroic stories, just like wealthiest passenger John Jacob Astor, who went down like a true gentleman and was willing to die for the sake of others despite his status. When it was clear that the Titanic was sinking into the freezing Atlantic Ocean, Astor loaded his young wife Madeline into a lifeboat. Astor could have easily sat next to his wife and lived, but according to eyewitness accounts, he realized there were two terrified children still on the ship and in need of saving. Astor selflessly gave up his place in the boat and was survived by his young wife Madeline and his unborn child, John Jacob Astor VI, nicknamed the Titanic Baby. Another heart-wrenching story is the one of Ida Strauss, who refused to leave her husband Isidore. As Ida reportedly said, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so we will die together." Witnesses last saw the pair on the deck with their arms around each other. What a hauntingly romantic gesture that makes you believe in true love. Just like the famous legend of Anne Elizabeth Isham and her beloved Great Dane, first-class passengers were allowed to bring their dogs on the RMS Titanic, and there were 12 confirmed dogs on board, including a fox terrier, a French poodle, a French bulldog, and a terrier named Kitty. 3 of the smaller dogs got really lucky and was able to make it onto the lifeboats undetected and safely home to New York. But Anne Elizabeth and her dog was not as fortunate, as crew members had deemed that her Great Dane was far too big to go on any of the lifeboats. So, instead of abandoning her loving pet just like the others, Isham allegedly stayed behind rather than leaving him alone to perish. I don't blame her one bit. You never give up on family. And later on, authorities retrieved the body of a woman holding a large dog. Sadly, the same cannot be said about third-class passengers. New documents have revealed that in an incredibly classist but almost predictable move, rescue crews tasked with damage control after the shipwreck got rid of the bodies of the third-class passengers back into the sea, all because they wanted to prioritize first and second-class remains. How anyone can treat human beings like that is beyond me. So while the rich were returned to their loved ones, most poor families were just claimed to be lost at sea. Unbelievable. So many lives were lost that night, and contrary to popular belief, the Titanic was never officially labeled as unsinkable by its builders or operators. The notion of the ship's invincibility was more of a media creation, stemming from the cutting-edge safety features it boasted, or it could be that one of the owners said that they believed it was unsinkable. We all know that history proved that even the most advanced technology can't always conquer nature's fury. Or maybe, just maybe, the disaster could have been avoidable. Shipmate Frederick Fleet was on the lookout for icebergs. No, he wasn't distracted watching Jack and Rose, but still, suddenly his worst nightmare happened. He spotted one straight ahead of the ship. But even when Fleet rang the bell in warning and telephoned the bridge to let them know they needed to avoid it, it wasn't enough to steer the ship of their fate. As the time from when he spotted the iceberg to the time of its fatal impact was only 37 seconds. Shockingly, the iceberg didn't even just come out of nowhere. The crew had received not one, not two, but 6 ice warnings prior to the collision, all of which they ignored. Another thing that doomed them was plain vanity. Supposedly, the designers of the Titanic took inspiration from the Ritz Hotel in London for the interiors. The facilities included a gym, a pool, a Turkish bath, a kennel for the first-class dogs, a squash court, and so on. Fancy, right? You get the idea. But the Titanic creators was ultimately a bit too concerned with appearances. The massive ship was carrying around 2,208 people, which would have meant a lot of the lifeboats cluttering the deck if they wanted to follow proper safety guidelines. So, to make the deck more presentable, they decided to reduce the number of the boats to 20 wooden ones and 4 collapsible ones. Looks are indeed deceiving. If there wasn't an insufficient amount of lifeboats, it could have definitely saved more lives. It was also said that there was a couple of unused lifeboats on the ship's deck, including a collapsible lifeboat, and that a bunch had been mistakenly left upside down by inexperienced crew or by sheer panic, rendering it useless during the evacuation. Another reason was that nobody expected the severity of the damage to be that bad. As a result, a largely disorganized and haphazard evacuation began, a little over an hour after contact with the iceberg. Because of that, no one really had enough time to successfully launch any safety protocols. Why is that, you ask? Well, some people thought the alarms were just a drill, and some wanted to stay warm inside, not realizing what was about to come. It didn't really help their situation, especially not as the passengers, once completely nonchalant about the situation, began to get more and more alarmed as the reality, sinks in. Cue the insanity. To top that off, although there weren't enough lifeboats on board, you might be thinking that surely there were enough life jackets to save people from drowning in the ocean, right? Not exactly, as there was about 1,100 bodies unaccounted for and never seen again. And unfortunately, drowning isn't really what should have been worried of, but the hypothermia caused by the freezing icy Atlantic waters, which was responsible for the deaths of roughly 340 bodies found floating. They just couldn't catch a break. However, Charles Jockin, a baker on the Titanic, can say otherwise. When he found out the ship was doomed, he first sent some men to get provisions from the bakery to hand out to the lifeboats on deck. But, as the story goes, once he was away from the crowds, he helped himself to a bottomless whiskey drink at the ship's well-stocked bar. I suppose he figured he was going to die, and what better way to go out than to indulge in a happy hour and get ridiculously drunk. This played well to his favor, as he was able to tread 2 hours in the frigid waters before encountering a lifeboat that saved him. I guess alcohol really does increase longevity. Now, we've all heard about the musicians playing as the Titanic met its tragic end. But did you know that the last song they played was Nearer, My God, to Thee? Their brave and poignant final act became one of the most iconic elements of the Titanic's story. All 8 members of the orchestra played on until the bitter end to keep spirits up when the Titanic's voyage took a chilling turn. Have you ever wondered how long they played for, or how long it took for the ship to sink? From the moment of the impact to the ship's final descent into the depths, the tragic journey spanned a mere 2 hours and 40 minutes. Just like that, the Titanic was in the bottom of the ocean floor. Efforts to locate and salvage it began almost immediately after it sank, but technical limitations, as well as the vastness of the search area, made it extremely difficult. And she was not found until years later in 1985, when a team of researchers finally found the wreck of the Titanic. Eerily, the discovery came just before 2:20 a.m., which was the exact time the ocean liner sank. But thanks to this team, we now exactly know where she lies, 73 years, 4 months, and 18 days after that grave night. With Philip Franklin, one of the owners of Titanic's famous last words, "We place absolute confidence in the Titanic. We believe that the boat is unsinkable," echoing in the deep with the Titanic's story as a tapestry woven in tragedy, courage, and the enduring allure of the unknown. For stories like this and more, make sure you subscribe and keep your notifications on so you never miss a video.